Join us now to talk more about this case and where things stand right now is cruise ship lawyer Michael Winkleman. Thank you for being with us on Law and Crime, because we don't see often a lot of cases like this on cruise ships. Of course, there's a ton of speculation right now. At the time we're recording this, the FBI hasn't released a statement. We know they're investigating. What does it tell you? We don't know if foul play is involved in this, but what does it tell you that the FBI is investigating?
Well, Chris, not much really. I mean, in any situation where you have a crime or an overboard or a death involving a U.S. citizen, the FBI is going to be involved, whether there's foul play or not. So the fact that the FBI is involved is not really surprising. They have jurisdiction over this type of a situation. So yeah, doesn't really point me in one direction or the other.
But even in that case, like for example, we do sadly see those overboard cases. I guess the way that, not even the sheriff's office for Miami, not a, I know they might have been in international waters. I mean, the FBI pretty much handles this as if it is the law enforcement agency for these types of events, whether it's an accidental situation or if it's something like foul play.
For sure, 100%. So yeah, anytime a U.S. citizen or resident has an issue, a major issue on a cruise ship, FBI is involved, but there's also going to be involved from local law enforcement, state law enforcement. So you've got a lot of entities in play. So what's going on now is the FBI certainly led the investigation. My guess is primarily completed their investigation. I have no doubt, Chris, that there's a tremendous amount of information or knowledge about what's happened that's known to the family, known to the cruise line, known to the FBI. It's just not public yet. So at this point, we're really left speculating, if not guessing, about what happened. But having done this for more than 20 years, and with my law firm having done it for more than 50 years, unfortunately, this is not something that's too surprising. Is it rare? Yes. Does it happen? Do I have strong feelings about why it may have happened? Yes.
Yeah, when you look at a cruise ship, because this particular one, the Horizon, and these like Carnival cruise ships, I mean, they're cities on water. I mean, this one had, I think, 15 decks, can carry roughly 4,000 passengers. If they're investigating, trying to figure out where this 18-year-old girl was, and we don't know aboard the ship where her body was found, none of those, certainly if you Google it, there's speculation all over the place, but in terms of the FBI and what we know, that hasn't been put out yet at the time of this recording. How does an agency, with the resources of this ship, I imagine there's a lot of security cameras, what can they go through to try and figure out what happened?
Well, I mean, there's something interesting about it because the cruise ship was obviously the first people to know about this, the first enforcement body, which is unusual because they're not independent. The cruise ship security staff, they work for the company. They're there to protect the company. I'm not saying there's any foul play involved. All I'm saying is there's not an independent law enforcement on the cruise ships. Having said that, when Anna died, when they found the body, they would have immediately conducted their own investigation. They would have gone back and retraced her steps, looking at all the different security cameras on the vessel. And they would really put together a complete package so that when they arrived back in port and the FBI got on the ship, they would say, hey, this is what happened. This is where it happened. This is what we have. Of course, the FBI would take that with a grain of salt, do their own investigation, but it's really the cruise line that is able to tee it up in whatever fashion they see fit. Again, I'm not saying or blaming or making any allegations. I'm just saying the fact that Carnival, this is their ship. You can't get on that ship. The FBI can't get on that ship unless they let them out on the ship. They've got a heck of a lot of power in terms of how the investigation unfolds.
Seems like too, and again, I'm just going to keep reiterating, we don't know what happened and we don't know if this is foul play or not. It's also interesting that it doesn't seem that there's been any information put out yet as to like who she was with on this trip on board. But what type of information? Because clearly if you buy a ticket to do a 6-day cruise on a Carnival cruise line, the ship, the surveillance on the ship, like they have a pretty good idea of where you are. What type of information? Because I think for an investigator, if they're trying to figure out, okay, was she with anybody on the night that she passed away, accidental death or not, that they would have a lot of information on the people who might be around her. What type of information maybe we don't know about or would expect that these cruise lines can have on a 6-day voyage?
I would think people would be alarmed if they knew how much data that they had related to cruise ship passengers at any given time. So when something bad like this happens, the security immediately gets involved. They're going to literally retrace the steps of Anna and what happened with her. They're going to look at who she was cruising with. They're going to look at every purchase that she made, whether there was any alcohol that she was able to get a hand of. They, of course, would have searched her cabin. Frankly, I'd be surprised if she wasn't traveling with her family. She was 18, so she could travel. alone, but my guess would be maybe she went with girlfriends. But look, I think, Chris, what's important is, well, number one, we don't know anything about exactly what happened, so all we can do is speculate. Out of respect for the family, I don't want to speculate as it relates to Anna's particular case, but what I can tell you is, based on my doing this for more than 20 years, what I think are the most likely factors that would be in play. I will say a lot of cases like this are suicides. Again, no evidence that Anna committed suicide, but a lot of times when people die on cruise ships, it's suicide. Of course, the other huge one would be a lot of older folks travel on cruise ships, so they might just have medical emergencies. Really has nothing to do with this case. And then the last one would be, and this I think is almost invariable when you're talking about a case like Anna's, and that's the overservice and overconsumption of alcohol. When that comes into play, that's when bad things happen. People go on cruise ships, they think they're in this magic insulated bubble of safety, but you hit the nail on the head before, Chris, when you said this is a giant floating city, 15 decks, thousands of people, thousands of crew members. A lot of bad things happen on cruise ships, and that's just the reality of it. But when people leave their common sense at the port, that's a bad recipe for disaster.
And generally speaking on this as well, because I do think we've seen the cases of, sadly children at times have fallen overboard in some of these cases. I feel like when you hear of like death stories, it's often a situation like that. Maybe it's an elderly person who passes away on board the ship from an illness, whatever it may be. I mean, how common, and I'm not saying it happened here, but how common is foul play on these ships? Because I think of people, you've given so much information to be on the ship, it feels like it would be the last place that someone would commit some sort of foul play on board a cruise ship.
Well, look, generally speaking, Chris, I think cruises are exceptionally safe, great family vacation. I think they're a wonderful thing. Having said that, I do think the word is out that cruise ships are actually a place where bad people can get away with bad things. Why? Because there is no independent law enforcement there. So when bad things happen, criminals know there's more of a likelihood, in my opinion, that stuff like that will get swept over the rug. Perfect example is like rapes and sexual assaults, which I always say are a hidden epidemic on cruise ships. When someone reports that on a cruise ship, the victim, in my experience and in my opinion, those cruise ship security guards are doing everything they can to try to convince the victim to not report it. So that to me is an example of things being swept under the rug all the time on cruise ships. So people think they're safe. They are generally, but a lot of bad things can happen, and people shouldn't leave their common sense at the port.
And I reached out to Carnival. We got the statement that everybody else has to this point, pretty much just telling us to go talk to the FBI, but admitting that the FBI is the one leading the investigation, which I know you were saying is pretty standard in these cases. And then just saying that there was a passenger who passed away. What does the cooperation look like between Carnival? Because yeah, I mean, to an extent, I mean, Carnival, this is their own security force, and they want to protect their company, but at the same time, you don't want to be accused of not cooperating with the FBI. And there's a lot of government cooperation that allows Carnival to operate out of these ports all across, in this case, Miami and Florida, Texas, places like that. How would you characterize in these investigations, if the FBI says they need information, how Carnival, some of these other cruise lines as well, how they cooperate with law enforcement?
Well, I mean, you make it sound, Chris, like cooperation is optional. It's really not. If the FBI is involved and the FBI is dealing with them and they ask for something, it's if FBI says jump, cruise line says how high. So to me, cooperation is not optional. In my experience, they do cooperate with it. I think to the extent there's an opportunity for them to protect themselves, it's even a step before that, before the FBI ever boards a ship. Again, no evidence of that, talking about generalities. But yeah, I think it really is unique because if a crime happens in a house in New York City, NYPD, it's busting down the doors, they're on site instantaneously, and they're an independent law force. Versus a cruise ship, FBI just can't hop on a cruise ship. They have to wait for it to get back to port. They have to wait to get access from the cruise line. They have to go through Port Authority. So there's really a sort of a unique sort of like safeguard or barricade, if you will, around cruise ships that really give them an advantage. I deal with that all the time in civil cases, negligence cases, where I don't have access to be able to go and inspect the scene without them letting me on, knowing I'm coming on, et cetera. There's definitely a significant information imbalance.
And when it comes to, I mean, way ahead of ourselves here probably, but when it comes to like civil lawsuits, and I know you work with that a lot in your line of work, when someone passes away on a cruise ship, I mean, how vulnerable is Carnival as a company to being sued for something that happened on board the ship, foul play or not, accidental or not, leading to that person's death?
Great question. And to be clear, I don't do anything in a criminal nature. I don't do criminal defense work, and it's only, a state body or federal body that can prosecute cases. Everything I do is negligence cases, civil cases. All we do as a firm is when people get hurt on cruise ships, we sue the cruise lines. The cases like this are rare, but they do happen. I think really the main talking point in a case like Anna's, which is really, I think, when it's going to be alarming to people, is when someone, like, assuming there was some level of civil negligence, let's say it was over service of alcohol, just as an example. If there was a negligence case to be brought against the cruise line, you would fall under the Death in the High Seas Act. What the Death in the High Seas Act is, this nasty federal law that was passed in 1920. So it's been around for more than 100 years. And it would basically limit the damages in Anna's case to her funeral expenses. It was a law that was passed so long ago to try to promote maritime commerce. It should have been taken off the books many, many years ago. Unfortunately, that's for Congress to do. And the cruise line spends tons and tons of money in lobbying efforts to try to prevent DOSHA from being changed. But assuming some facts come to light regarding the negligence of the cruise lines, I always hope it's a high profile case that alerts Congress to seeing the need that there's no reason to protect the cruise lines. And what I always say is give them a get out of jail free card with the Death in the High Seas Act.
That's really interesting. I'd never heard of that before, because I think in some cases, if someone was served at a bar on land, overserved, a lot of times those bars could be really on the hook for some very strong lawsuits. Just the fact that the bar is on a boat, that completely changes. Just funeral expenses?
Yeah, yeah. So using your hypothetical, someone goes to the bar, they're served 24 Long Island iced teas, blast that out of their mind. They turn around, they slip and fall in a puddle of water, hit their head, bleed out, and die. If it's on the high seas, falls under the Death in the High Seas Act, dramatically limits the damages to funeral expenses. In certain situations, just to be clear, what the law says is that it limits the damages to dependent beneficiaries. So for me, who has two small children and a wife, I would still have significant damages. But if an older person who dies on a cruise ship that's not working, doesn't have any dependent beneficiaries, or a child dies, that's where you see the really egregious depriving nature of the Death in the High Seas Act.
And looking at this case, I think the last time we spoke, it was related to a case of a woman who was working aboard a super yacht in the Bahamas, and the boat was docked in the Bahamas. She was allegedly killed by a member of this yacht's crew. If in this case, and again, I'm not saying that foul play happened, but if it's proven that she died in international waters, because I know in like the Bahamas case, that is a case that the Bahamian government is handling. But if she's aboard a Carnival cruise ship and say they're coming back from wherever they were, I think it was somewhere in the Caribbean, and she's in international waters, does that have any impact on how like an investigation could play out?
No, the only difference would be that theoretically, wherever they were, like let's say it was the Bahamas, I know this was the Caribbean, but the Bahamian Maritime Authority could also have jurisdiction. You could also look at the flag of the vessel, which may have been Bahamian. So that would just bring other players into the investigative nature of it. But in my experience, it's the FBI show. The FBI runs it. And really, those other authorities from the local jurisdictions, they have an interest, yes, but they're not really heavily involved.
And then when it comes to this case, and obviously, I mean, as a member of the media, and I think as the public, everybody's very eager to know what happened, and there's just a ton of speculation, and we'll see what the FBI says. She returned to port on Saturday, I believe it was, and then her body was taken off, and then the investigation's ongoing. I guess how quick does the FBI typically work in these cases? I know that's kind of a hard question to say, specifically it's only going to take this amount of time, but if it's a Saturday investigation and then we're not hearing anything on Monday, do you find in some of these cases that the FBI is pretty tight-lipped when it comes to investigations into what happens on cruise ships?
Well, the FBI has to be tight-lipped. That's part of their mandate is confidentiality, victim rights, things of that nature. So anytime there's a situation where when they're investigating, they're not just disclosing everything. There are certainly exceptions to that. I think in most of these cases, you'd have the family that comes over and talks about what happened, or they retain an attorney such as myself, and I file a case, and then we have a better picture about what goes on. And in terms of the timeliness of it, I mean, the ship came back into port on Saturday, and I think it turned around the same day. That certainly tells me that they were able to do what they needed to do on the vessel relatively quickly. I mean, my guess is the medical examiner is involved at this point. So they're going to dot all the I's and cross all the T's. I think probably, Again, I think the family, I think the FBI, and I think the cruise line knows exactly what happened. The question becomes, will the public ever know about it?
Yeah, and we'll see what happens. And Michael, just before we go, because it's great to have you on here, um, I guess what's some of the if you would give advice to people when it comes to taking a cruise, and not specific to this case, but I know you're talking about issues like sexual assaults on cruise ships. I mean, what would be your best piece of advice when it comes to safety aboard cruise ships that maybe people don't think about when they book that trip?
Really, there's two pieces of advice that I'd primarily go with. One of which I've sort of touched on a couple of times before, which is don't leave your common sense at the port. Again, people hop on cruise ships and they think they're in this magic insulated bubble of safety, like they're at Disney World or something, and that's just not the case. As you said at the very outset, these are floating cities. You need to treat yourself and your family just like you were in New York City. You wouldn't let your kids wander around New York City at nighttime or really anytime, so you really shouldn't do that on cruise ships either, given what is a higher prevalence of rapes and sexual assaults on cruise ships. And the other thing I always say is read your ticket contract, because cruise lines require you to file suit in certain places. The vast majority of them require you to sue in Miami, Florida, which of course is where our firm is. But the trend now is becoming, and in particular with a lot of international cruises, they're trying to get to force people to sue in foreign jurisdictions, the United Kingdom, Italy, etc., Australia. The problem with those is that they don't have the same legal system that we do, and that's generally going to limit your rights significantly.
Really good points to remember when booking a trip as we continue to follow this story, and we'll see how it plays out. Obviously, very early on in the investigation. Michael Winkleman, cruise ship lawyer, thank you, sir, for taking the time to be with us on Law and Crime. We appreciate it.
Chris, nice to see you. If anything new develops, reach out and we'll get back on here.